Heroes and leaders. Bessie Coleman broke barriers when she got her pilot's license in 1921. She would eventually earn the nickname Queen Bess, and her story still takes flight throughout North Texas. Here's Jay Wallace.
Bessie Coleman was born in 1892 in Atlanta, Texas, near where the Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana borders meet. Her family moved to Waxahachie when she was 2, where they lived as sharecroppers. Coleman spent the majority of her childhood and school years in North Texas before moving to Chicago in 1915. Coleman started out by working as a manicurist at the White Sox barbershop. Here, some believe she heard stories from pilots talking about flying during World War I. American flight schools didn't admit women nor black people at the time, so Robert S. Abbott, founder of the Chicago Defender, wrote about Coleman's quest in his newspaper and even supported her financially, along with black bank owner Jesse Binga. Coleman took French language classes in Chicago before traveling to Paris to earn her license. In June of 1921, Coleman became the first black woman and first Native American to earn her pilot license. By the time she returned to America later that year, she was already a highly regarded famous figure across the country. Coleman focused her attention on barnstorming, which is when stunt pilots perform dangerous tricks while flying their planes. With no one in the States to teach her, Coleman headed back to Europe. It was around this time she started performing and earned the nicknames Queen Bess and Brave Bessie. In September of 1922, Coleman made her first appearance in America at an event honoring veterans of the all-black 369th Infantry Regiment from World War I. She oftentimes showcased stunts such as figure eights, loops, and near-ground dips. Coleman did make sure to regularly speak out against racism, telling audience members about the number of black people who want and should be encouraged to become pilots. She refused to be a part of any events that wouldn't allow black people in the audience. At one point, Coleman was given the chance to be in the movie Shadows and Sunshine. However, once she learned what the filmmakers wanted her to wear and how she would be stereotypically depicted, she stepped away from the movie, refusing to perpetuate the derogatory imagery of black people. In April of 1926, Coleman planned to fly in Jacksonville, Florida, in a plane she recently bought in Dallas. About 10 minutes into her flight, the plane took a dive, spinning to the ground and crashed, killing Bessie Coleman at the age of 34. News of her death deeply impacted the black community across the country as activist Ida B. Wells led ceremonies at her burial site in front of 10,000 people paying their respects. In Atlanta, Texas, where Coleman's life began, there is a section in the city's Regional History Museum devoted to her story and her plane. Roads at multiple airports around the world, including O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, are named in her honor. In Cedar Hill ISD, you will find Bessie Coleman Middle School, which has parts to her story spread throughout the hallways. While she is a part of countless Hall of Fames and in many museums, what might make Coleman the proudest is the number of aviation groups and clubs today filled with a diverse group of pilots that can be thankful Bessie Coleman established herself as one of the true pioneers of the air.